Why is sin so appalling and grace so amazing? We have to understand this. We have to understand the darkness and the bitterness of sin so we can understand the beautiful glory of grace. Sin is everything that God is not. My every selfish act, my self-centered thought, my self-seeking pleasure, every unkind or cruel motive, every grasping, selfish lust and desire, every moment of disregarding my Maker, every doubting, unbelieving moment when I impugn God's faithfulness and His compassion and His motives by saying, no, that can't be true, what He said. Every unclean flicker of my mind, every self-delusional, embarrassing self-love, self-worship and pridefulness of my thinking, every lazy, negligent, not wholehearted thought or action toward God, every tiny desire to serve myself. All of this is everything God is not. And it's so appallingly, diametrically opposite to Him that I shudder to wonder how such a creature could ever stand before Him. The very essence of every molecule of God's being, if such a thing could even be said of God. The very essence of every molecule of His mind, of His motives, of His character, of His nature, and of His intent is so far away from my equivalent of those things that such a distance couldn't possibly be bridged. It could hardly be comprehended. It's such a great gulf. Between a man and God is such a difference. It's such a contrast. There's such otherness. There's such an impossible separation. There's such a foreignness, such an incomprehensible divide, such an utter lack of sameness, such a complete divergence that nothing and no one could ever bridge that gap and create similarity and create sameness with God and unity with God and a mutual connection with God, except perfection itself, and a power and a grace and a kindness and a pity and a mercy and a strength and a life and a love so immense and so mighty that it could only be Almighty God Himself. How could something or someone so utterly opposite, so utterly different and opposed to, and contrary to, and repulsive to, and unlike, and resistant to God, be made one with someone so perfect? How could this ever be? How could it ever be possible that something so black and wicked could be brought near to something so light and pure and not be ended? How could the very person who brought murderous death to the Lord of life be pardoned? My sin, even in its tiniest manifestation, even in its most secret and subtle impulse, even at its least damaging to other humans, even in its most unspoken and hidden breath, is the vilest, most repelling, most opposite thing to holiness that could ever exist. My sin is like the darkest, deadest, most rancid oil that could never, ever mix with the purest water of life, of God. My sin is like the strongest magnet in the cosmos, repelling God's mighty magnet of love, ever unable to connect, ever unable to join with and attract God's attention by anything in itself, no matter how hard it tries. Oh, the impossibility of sin, the impossibility of reconciliation with God, the impossibility of health and wholeness, the impossibility of living in this condition. Never has the grace that bridged this gap been seen or heard of or comprehended or imagined. How great is this grace? What a spiritual blessing is this forgiveness. Do you see a little more? This isn't just Jesus died on the cross to save me from my sins. Oh, if you just knew the depth of separation, the impossibility of being with holiness, you would understand the depth of this amazing grace. It's like your past never existed. It's like your past never happened. And yet you live in your past, some of you. You dwell there, you're always going back there. You're recreating your past in your mind. Well, he doesn't remember it. In his great omnipotence, his great omniscience, he says, I have forgotten. Every dark, treasonous sin against holiness, purity, and love has been blotted out. It has been forgotten. It has been cast behind his back. And you have been brought to reconciliation with God. You're on speaking terms with God. Do you understand what this means? You're at peace with perfection. This is impossible. But for Christ, your spirit has been made one spirit with his spirit. How can these things be? What spiritual blessings we have been given in our redemption.